Director of the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation, and on behalf of all the foundation team and the library team, and I particularly want to recognize Alan Price, who runs the library side, and the incoming director, Rachel Floor. Can both of you stand up? Be recognized? You are in for a very special treat. I know we have a lot of great forums. This is incredibly special today. Before we talk about the forums, I want to thank all of our forum sponsors, including the Bank of America as the lead sponsor, the Lowell Institute, and the media sponsors, the Boston Globe, Xfinity. I also want to recognize Jim and Kathy Stone for their support. Many of you are members today, and we appreciate that. If you're not a member, we hope you'll consider joining. It allows us to offer programs like this free and open to everyone going forward. We also want to welcome many of you, not just those in the room, but those who are watching online. We appreciate that. We also want to recognize there are many members of our board of directors here, our New Frontier Network leadership, and the former First Lady of the City of Boston, Angela Menino. So join me to thank all of them for their support. After the speaking part of the program, Senator Jones has graciously agreed to sign copies of his book, and I know many of you already have it, but if you don't, our bookstore is selling it, and I really encourage you. It is a treasure. As I was just saying to the Senator, I knew the general outlines, but I didn't know the details, and he brings it back vividly, and I know that you're going to all enjoy it. I also want to encourage you, when you leave, to turn your cell phones on, because I'm sure they're all off now. So be sure to turn them on. So today, it's really a special pleasure to welcome Senator Doug Jones, the author of Bending Towards Justice, the Birmingham Church Bombings that changed the course of civil rights. We're also thrilled that his wife, Louise, is with him today. He has served, as you know, as senator since 2017, as a U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Alabama from 1997 to 2001, where he prosecuted 2 former Klan members for their roles in this bombing that you're going to hear so much about. He also has done so much more in his career, again, that he'll talk about that's in the book. We're also equally thrilled to have William Baxley and his wife Marie and daughter Evelyn and many members of their extended family here, that he served as Attorney General from 1971 to 1979 and Lieutenant Governor from 83 to 87. And as Attorney General, he successfully prosecuted the Klan trials and for the 63 bombing, and also did so much more both in his public and private life to make life justice. You know, we're in a building that honors President Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy for what they did in civil rights and so much more. But I think about these 2 gentlemen, and on the ground, it's hard to imagine 2 people that affected Alabama and the course of our history more than them. So we really appreciate your leadership and all that you've done. Not to be outmatched, our moderator. She is a remarkable woman and someone I know. My wife has had an honor to work with her for 2 decades. Margaret Burnham is the founder of the Northeastern University School of Law, Civil Rights and Restorative Justice Project that conducts research and supports policy initiatives on anti-civil rights, violence in the United States, and so much more. Her distinguished career has included being a Carnegie Fellow, being a leader at the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, and her appointment by Nelson Mandela as a precursor to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, as well as the first African-American woman to serve on the Massachusetts Judiciary. So join me to welcome all of them. First, Senator Jones is going to come up for a presentation, and he'll be joined by the other 2 in a few minutes. Senator?
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I mean, this is an amazing honor for me. I got to be honest about this. I was 6 years old when John Kennedy was elected president. And if you read the book, and you know, so many like me buy books and you don't get the chance to read them sometime, but if you read it, you will see that there is a Kennedy theme almost throughout. From the time that John Kennedy influenced me as a young kid, through going back in these cases with the Kennedy Justice Department and looking at the old files from 1963 when Bobby Kennedy was the Attorney General and President Kennedy and Burke Marshall and John Doerr, all of those folks were down in Alabama in the South trying to do the right thing and make us do the right thing, to the time that when I worked in the U.S. Senate in 1979 and 1980 for my old boss, Howell Heflin from Alabama, whose seat I'm in now. Ted Kennedy was the chairman of Judiciary. So for me to be standing here today with you is just an unbelievable honor, and I really mean that. I'm so thankful to be here, and Louise joining me, and with my old friend Bill Baxley, because Bill really started this. We talk a lot about these cases and how they were resurrected in the 1990s and 2000s, but Bill Baxley in 1977 prosecuted the first of these cases, a guy named Chambliss. He was an attorney general, and it was a much braver thing to do then than it was for me. For me, it was something that we had to do. But for Bill, he put his political neck on the line. And so it's just an interesting journey, I think, for Alabama and the South, and a couple of, especially me growing up in Fairfield, Alabama. I was 9 years old when this bombing happened. And what I'm going to do today, I'm going to go through some photographs and some slides and all to talk a little bit about the history of the bombing, a little bit about, in my cases, a little bit about Bill's, but not quite as much, and he can talk about that before we get to some questions with me and Bill. So this hopefully will give you a little bit of a background. But I want to tell you that this story always begins and ends with the 16th Street Baptist Church. If you've never been there, please come to Birmingham and visit it. Our former mayor calls it sacred ground, where these four girls died. And the church today is very much like it was in 1963. It has undergone some renovations, but it's very similar and attracts people from all over the world. And the church building itself, the structure is very much the same, except for one thing. And if you look here, and you'll see some of these exhibit numbers in this, because we used a lot of these. You will see in the very bottom right corner there some concrete steps. Those steps led to the back of the sanctuary. And is this one on? Okay, can y'all hear me if I move around? I tend to do that. Those steps led to the back of the sanctuary. They went right in front of the ladies' lounge where these children were getting ready. And that's where that bomb was placed. And those steps were not replaced. They've not been there since 1963. September 15th, a Sunday morning in September of 1963. But as we prepared these cases, lawyers do, you go back and you look at a lot of things. We looked at a ton of old files. I mean, the case file was still in Birmingham, but we also did a lot of history. We looked at a lot of the history books, and one of the things that we found is that you go back to 1954 and the Brown versus Board of Education decision. So much of racial violence occurred because orders for black kids and white kids to go to school together created havoc. You up here know what I'm talking about. But it happened a lot in the South as well. And in 1957, one of the great leaders of the movement, Fred Shuttlesworth, decided he was going to try to test this. And he was going to enroll his kids in an all-white school in downtown Birmingham. Fred Shuttlesworth, if you haven't read about Fred, you need to. Without Fred Shuttlesworth, there might not have been a Martin Luther King. He was the most courageous man I've ever known in my life. And in 1957, he was going to enroll his two daughters in a school, an all-white school. And there was a young man who happened to show up that day who went to that school to get his transcript. And there was a mob of white people from Birmingham, about 300 by estimates, waiting there on Fred. And this young man was working for the local television station. And he decided to go, and he grabbed his camera because he knew something was about to happen. He didn't know what. And he got caught on film what happened to Fred. And I want to try to show this real quick. And maybe if I can stop it, we'll see if it goes. I want to point out something. All right. Now, well, it's not stopping. Nope, there it stopped. Okay. Right there where that cursor is, if you can see it, the guy in the middle there, keep your eye on him because you'll see him reach in his pocket in a second and come around and start and get back into the fight. You'll see Reverend Shuttlesworth on the left. He gets beat up. He gets kicked. His wife was there. She gets stabbed with a pocket knife in her hip. And that's what was going on. And I want to show you, watch this guy. You can see him reach in his pocket right there. And then he just kind of circles back around and gets back in it. Now, there's two things about this film that I want to mention. Number one, Fred Shuttlesworth was a preacher. He was a man of faith. And that's what happened to even men of faith if they tried the unthinkable of wanting black kids to go to school with white kids. This was a preacher, somebody that got attacked like that for just trying to get his children and others a better education. Making a point, for sure. But the other man that I pointed out, the white guy in the white shirt, was Bobby Frank Cherry, one of the guys that I prosecuted later on. He didn't have any kids in that school, but felt compelled to violence to try to stop school integration. And so the first piece of the puzzle in my cases falls into place. Now, there was a lot of other violence in Birmingham between 1957, when that occurred, and 1963. As the civil rights movement grew, so did the Klan violence, because they couldn't stop it. And the only way they could try to stop it was violence. We had 30, 40 bombings over a 20-year period in Alabama. Freedom Riders came through Birmingham in 1961, and Bull Connor, the police commissioner, held them off for 20 minutes to let the Klan beat them to a pulp. In 1962, the Birmingham City Council was changed. Actually, the form of government was changed. And it was in 1963, with a lot that had been going on in Birmingham, Alabama, the most segregated city in America by Dr. King's words, that he came to Birmingham and brought the movement in full force. And in that movement, when they came to Birmingham, this was the spring of 1963, it was a lot of the adults that got out and marched. But adults were going to lose jobs. They had jobs in factories and foundries over the city, and they were going to lose these jobs. So they had the idea that, you know what, we're going to put the kids out there. The Birmingham marches became known as the Children's Crusade, because they gathered at the 16th Street Baptist Church. They were just going to march a few blocks to City Hall. But this is what happened. They got met with fire hoses and dogs. Bull Connor was waiting on them just outside. Those got flashed around the world. Everybody knows what happened in Birmingham, and it caused, in part, President Kennedy, as much as anything, to start really getting ready for the Civil Rights Act, what would become the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That and the murder of Medgar Evers that occurred later. There were some 2,000 or 3,000 kids that were arrested, so many that they had to be put in a makeshift jail where the state fairgrounds were, where our state fair came every year. But there's a group of folks meeting with Dr. King when he got released. And by the way, that's when Dr. King wrote the letter from a Birmingham jail. And I would tell you, if you hadn't read that in a while, you should read it again. It is as important today as it was in 1963. With all that we have going on in our country. And we read it on the floor of the Senate this past year, and I was really proud of that. But I would commend that to you. Because at the time, Dr. King and Reverend Shuttlesworth and Reverend Abernathy decided that they came up with this modest settlement. It would end the marches, and it would take down white and colored signs, but it wouldn't hire black police officers. It was just a modest settlement to end some of the city's Jim Crow laws. But even with that very, very modest settlement, the Klan was not happy. This is a photograph of Robert Shelton. Robert Shelton was the Imperial Wizard or the Grand Poobah or somebody. I don't know what his title was. It was really long. I do know that. And he, of the United Klans of America, based in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And he announced that settlement was going to be Dr. King's epitaph. And sure enough, a bomb exploded that night at the A.G. Gaston Motel where Dr. King had been staying. Fortunately, he had gone and headed back to Atlanta. But the die was cast. And now, all of a sudden, the children of Birmingham who took to the streets were the focal points of the movement, as was the church where they gathered. And when you get to be the focal point, the symbol of the movement, as much as Dr. King, as much as Reverend Shuttlesworth, when you get to be the symbol of the movement, you may as well put a bullseye on your chest and your back. because you were the target of the Klan wrath. And 2 weeks after this settlement, Dr. A.D. King, the brother of Martin Luther King's home, was bombed. It was just a month or so after that Governor Wallace stood in the schoolhouse door. You saw, that's Nicholas Katzenbach with his arms crossed there. He was the deputy attorney general, the deputy to Robert F. Kennedy, who they sent down to handle this. There's a great film called Crisis Behind a Presidential Commitment. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's about this day in the life of George Wallace and Bobby Kennedy. Unbelievable documentary. Y'all, Steve, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. George Wallace stepped aside, but there were armed Klansmen around Tuscaloosa waiting for the race war, which you got to remember as the importance of these cases and looking back. You know, that's the same language that we heard Dylan Roof talk about right before he shot up a church in Charleston and killed 9 people. But he stepped aside. And by the way, Wallace blocked initially. He stepped aside, but he blocked 2 kids initially. One of them was Vivian Malone, who is from Mobile, Alabama. Her sister, Sharon, is a doctor in Washington, D.C., and their last name is Holder, and she's married to Eric Holder. So, yeah. So now you can win the trivia question that is going to be asked at the end of the day. More bombings that occurred, more violence in Birmingham. This is Arthur Shores. He was first black on the Birmingham City Council. His home was bombed twice that summer. Here's a photograph. And then in August of 1963, hope is truly in the air. As Dr. King delivers his I Have a Dream speech, 300,000 people. And there's hope in the air. But in Birmingham, Alabama, they have had a federal lawsuit that got filed after Fred Shuttlesworth tried to integrate the schools in 1957, and it took it 6 years. And now federal courts, with the help of the Justice Department, the Kennedy Justice Department, has said that Birmingham City Schools has got to desegregate. And this is what was going on outside the city schools of Birmingham in 1963. Now, let me tell you something, folks. If anybody, I've given this speech now since 2001, and I always show this picture, and even before Dylan Roof, I said the same thing. If anybody ever questions whether or not the Confederate battle flag is a symbol of hate and not of history, look at that. That is not a history class outside studying. That is a symbol of white supremacy and the resistance. And on September 10th, 5 days before this bombing, these young men, Dwight and Floyd Armstrong, walk into Gray Mountain Elementary School. And that triggered, I believe, what occurred on Sunday, September 15th, when 4 young girls, 4 or 5 actually, were in the ladies' lounge. This is Addie Mae Collins. She was 14 at the time, went to Sunday school and church with her sisters that morning. Cynthia Morris Wesley, who was living with the Wesley family. She came from a large family, and her social worker had her convinced her mom to let her live with the Wesleys, who were educators and had no children. Denise McNair, and this picture is one that I cherish. Her family has been friends of mine for a long time. Her dad was a photographer, and this was his favorite picture of Denise, and I used it in this trial with a real special meaning that came later. And then Carol Robertson, the daughter of Alpha Robertson. These young ladies were just they were getting ready for what was going to be a youth worship service. The youth were going to come back to this church together again, not to march, not to demonstrate, but for faith, because that's what you normally do at these churches. And that's what Reverend Cross wanted. And at 10:23, the bomb exploded right underneath those steps. John Cross was the minister. He always lived with the guilt because he knew he put the bullseye on his church. And he lived with the guilt. He had retired to Atlanta, and he came across. He talked about being up in the sanctuary because the adult Sunday school classes were meeting up there. And he identified all of the photographs that you see. If you look to the right, that's a door on the far right side there, and the steps went in front of that opening, which was the window to the ladies' lounge, where those men are standing. So you can see that this bomb, which is a pretty powerful bomb, it destroyed the steps, and the ladies' lounge took the brunt. It blew out all the windows across the street, destroying the cars that are in front. Inside the church, the adult Sunday school classes were meeting. That's where Reverend Cross was. He had to go by and go down through the back way. and go through the window there where the bomb had been placed, the crater of the bomb that blew through 18 inches of concrete to show you how powerful this was. And the ladies' lounge obviously took the brunt of this. It destroyed the walls, exposing the steps. And then if you look real hard, you can see a sink over there, which becomes part of the story. And then the most famous picture above the ladies' lounge, there is a stained glass window of Jesus as the Good Shepherd. And if you look real close, you'll see that the most significant damage was of the face of Christ. You can imagine the symbolism that had for the people of that church and people of goodwill and faith all over the world when that picture got flashed around the world. FBI did an amazing job. Kennedy and J. Edgar Hoover, by the way, did an amazing job trying to investigate this case, but it never got anywhere. There was on a 5-year statute of limitations. So the case got closed, but they always knew there was a group of people that were involved. One was this guy, Robert Chambliss. He worked for the city of Birmingham, and these guys were part of a splinter group. They were much more violent. Chambliss was kind of the ringleader along with Tommy Blanton. This was a picture of Blanton when he was interviewed by the FBI after the bombing. A photograph of Blanton before his trial in 2001. And Bobby Frank Cherry, who you saw in the video. A real loudmouth. Cherry at his trial in 2002. And these guys would meet underneath a bridge just outside of Birmingham. They literally would leave Klan meetings and go meet underneath the bridge like a bunch of damn little trolls or something that used to scare me when I was a kid. And that's where they would plot their mischief on all things integration and desegregation. They would leave there and go do missionary work, which so much of the Klan doctrine is based on the Bible, and that would be just to grab a black man on the street and just beat him up because they could, and they wanted to show them and keep them in their place. And there was also a lot of activity at the Modern Sign Shop that weekend, both of which are pieces of the puzzles for these trials that would come years and years later. We had a remarkable number of folks that came. The families of these children were just amazing. This is Alpha Robertson. Alpha Robertson was home. Her daughter had gone to the church, and she was at home getting ready. And when I asked her on the witness stand, you know, what she heard, she said it sounded like the whole world was shaking. And truly, that's what happened. The whole world did shake when this bomb blew up, as people asked why and how could this happen. She was called by my trial consultant as the moral center of the universe, an amazing, amazing lady. Junie Collins, Addie Mae's sister, was across counting the money that day, had to go identify the body of her sister that day and had a difficult time dealing with it over the years. Eunice Davis was living apart from her sister Cynthia. And, oh my God, only 5 minutes? I knew this was going to happen. Okay. Maxine McNair, who screamed, "My baby, my baby." Chris McNair, her dad, who went to a different church and had to go identify the body of his only daughter at the time, still with a piece of mortar embedded in her skull. And he saved that mortar. And when I asked him why he saved it, he said, because he had this little memorial room set up. And he said, people remember the girls, but they really can't fully appreciate what people can do in the name of hate unless they see this mortar. And I always remembered him. Bobby Frank Cherry was defendant. This is a press conference. He actually announced the opening of the case. I won't go into details. This guy would lie through his teeth. He would lie everywhere he went. He never told a straight story to either Bill's folks, my folks. But when he held this press conference, our phone started ringing, and the first person that called us was his granddaughter to say, "Thank God everybody knows my granddad did this. He used to brag about it." We got a call from an ex-wife, Willadine Brogdon, who saw it in a newspaper in Montana and called the FBI to talk about the fact of how she was married to him for only a period of a couple years. But he would scare her to death wearing the Klan robes. And then one time with a car broke down near the church, he pointed out on the steps where they planted the bomb. Another call was Michael Goins. Michael Goins was living in Texas with Cherry, and in some testimony that I think is really indicative of today's political climate. He was living in Texas, in Dallas, and they're complaining about the rise of the Hispanic population. And Cherry says we need to do to the Mexicans the same things that we did to the black folks in Birmingham. And you can imagine the racial slurs. James Lay was a civil defense worker, saw the car 2 weeks before the bombing at 1 o'clock in the morning, saw a car parked outside the church and had two men, one by the car and one by those steps. He identified one as Chambliss, who Baxley would prosecute, and the other as Tommy Blanton. Strong circumstantial evidence. We had Mrs. Gerthis Glenn, who was visiting from Detroit. This is her car. This is her testifying at the Baxley trial. She saw that car at 2 o'clock in the morning and the dome light was on, and she identified Robert Chambliss. She testified but had died, and we couldn't use her testimony. We had an informant, Mitch Burns, who rode around for a year or so with Blanton, trying to get incriminating information with a tape recorder. He was an FBI informant. Unfortunately, we couldn't get it, but he did get some things. He would talk about Blanton would talk about what he would do when he bombed his next church. He would talk about all the things. At one point when they were picking up Cherry, he said, you know, this is the alley we missed the night we bombed the church. Finally, there was John Colvin. John worked with the FBI, and he pretended to be a truck driver. And he planted a bug in the Blanton home because Blanton had gotten married to his girlfriend, Jean. And I'm not going to play the tape because we don't have time, but at 3 points in this tape, he says they went to the meeting at the river, which we just talked about, and that's where you can see at the bottom where we planned the bomb. He says it again, we had the meeting to plant the bomb. And he says it a third time, oh, we were making the bomb. And his girlfriend at the time, Jean, says, well, at his wife, says that she had lied to the FBI right there is important. Last thing I'll leave you with is a remarkable story of how things just came together for us. You can read all about it, but I got to tell you, it was unbelievable. And some people, I am absolutely convinced, just stayed alive to help us finish it. One of them was James Lay, who had had a stroke 2 months before, and we read his testimony in the courtroom. And he died about a month after the Blanton case. John Colvin testified in both Blanton and Cherry and authenticated the tape. He died about a month after the Cherry case in 2002. Miss Robertson testified in both cases. She was an amazing lady, and she died when I went to her about 2 months after the Cherry case. When I went to her funeral, I went to her memorial. Her son said, thanks for coming, Doug, but more important, thanks for what you did. It's because of you. She died with a smile on her face. She was something. Mitch Burns had a heart attack and died about 6 months after the Cherry case. Michael Goins about a year. John Cross a year after that. Eunice Davis a year after that. All these people, Fred Shuttlesworth, they all died, and then at one point it was Bobby Frank Cherry who died in Alabama prison. The last thing I want to tell you about is go back to that sink, because this is a story that doesn't often get told, because there were 5 girls in that ladies' lounge, and one is often forgotten because she survived. Sarah Collins Rudolph was my last witness, and she testified about going to Sunday school and church that morning and how excited they were. And she talked about going over to that sink in the ladies' lounge to wash her hands, and she hears Denise McNair say something about her new dress. She turned around and she looked, and I said, Miss Collins, what did you see? She said, I saw my sister tying the sash of Denise's new dress. Well, then what happened? She said, well, then there was the explosion. And I was buried underneath all the rubble, and I couldn't move. I could barely speak. I said, what did you say? She said, I called out for help. I said, tell me, what did you say? She said, I called out for Sister Addie. I called out, Addie, Addie, Addie. Her voice just rising up like it did 37 years earlier. Did you ever hear see her, or hear her? No, sir. Did you ever see her alive again? No, sir. And with that, in my cases, I looked at Judge Jim Garrett and said, Your Honor, the state of Alabama rests its case. It was a pretty remarkable ending to a remarkable story. And I keep coming back to one photograph, one last photograph, because this case says it all. And that's what I told the jury, and you'll see some of the transcripts in the book. But this case captured everything. A small black child holding her best friend, a white Chatty Cathy doll. It was an image of hope. It was an image of the kids who marched, but it was also an image of the death of those children. But today it is an image of hope. That small black child holding her white Chatty Cathy doll. That's the hope of a race of people in '63, but the hope of us all on this planet today. We can live better, love each other more, respect each other a hell of a lot more, and move over together as one beloved community, as Dr. King said. So with that, I'm going to end this, turn it back over, and we'll come up and talk about the book. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator, for taking us back to Birmingham, 1963, September 15th. Thank you for your work as a trial lawyer in Alabama in 2001, bringing a bit more justice to Alabama and to our country. Thank you for your service as a U.S. Senator. And I have to ask the question, here we are in a place that celebrates political courage. And this is political courage. And yet he is in the fight of his life so that he can continue to serve us and serve his Alabama co-citizens for another 6 years. That's crazy. Let me just say that Doug Jones is not only an amazing trial lawyer, and you just saw that, and not only a courageous, deeply thoughtful and effective senator, but he's also a fabulous writer. And his book joins that of several others who've written about this period in Alabama, and that gives us a fuller sense of this momentous time in our country's history. Fred Gray has written a book. Diane McWhorter wrote a book, Carry Me Home. She's from Birmingham, Alabama. Fred Shuttlesworth autobiography. But Doug's book fills that story out in a way that makes it complete and whole and real and honest for us. And so I urge all of you to buy the book.
Thank you.
He didn't pay me.
I'm Doug Jones, and I approve that message.
We're also honored here to have with us today Attorney General Bill Baxley, who really begun this process of re-examining these moments, these desperate, deep, dark moments in our country's history. With the first trial of the Birmingham case in 1977, since Attorney General Baxley tried the case in 1977, there have been many, many other cases tried, but it was about 20 years between the trial of Chambliss in 1977 in Birmingham and the next case that was tried in Mississippi, in Jackson, Mississippi in 1994. So that gives you a sense of the enormous courage and fortitude that it took for Attorney General Baxley to try the case in 1977, to begin this process of re-examining that history. And I'd ask you, Attorney General, to tell us a little bit about the obstacles that you faced as you proceeded, political and legal obstacles that you may have faced as you proceeded to try to bring justice to this case in 1977.
Well, Professor, if I may, can I start by thanking the library and the museum for the opportunity to be up here. President Kennedy and the Kennedy family were terrific influences on me. And people sometimes wonder where I started feeling like I did. I said, well, I've always felt that way. I felt like when I was a kid that it wasn't even right when I walked out and saw how people were treated in my little town, which is an oasis in a way of tolerance compared to some cities in Alabama. But I said it wasn't right, and I never believed that it was right. And so then people like President Kennedy galvanized me into thinking maybe I could do something. And so it's really special to come here to this particular place and be on this program. And I want to say one other thing before I get into that, but it ties into it. The biggest regret that I had in my political career was that I left office with only being able to finish the trial of one of them, Chambliss, who was the ringleader. But we knew who had done the others. I went out of office, and the other people that came in after me wouldn't touch that case with a 100-foot pole because they thought it was politically unpopular. And I suppose it was. And I didn't realize at the time there was a kid in law school in '77 in Birmingham. And he cut classes every day and attended that trial. And if I'd known that over the last 20 years before, I wouldn't have had as much anxiety about not finishing that job. But that kid was Doug Jones, and he came in and picked it up 20 years later and finished the job that I couldn't do. And so Doug will always be one of my heroes. But now to answer your question, I'll try to. There were a lot of obstacles. Of course, racial prejudice was still fairly prevalent in Alabama, not as bad as it had been in '63, but it wasn't an easy thing to do. None of them had been done in the Deep South, any of the crimes. And I got elected in 1970 and took office in January '71, and we immediately started an investigation within a month or two. And we sent and got the state trooper files, and we got a copy of the Birmingham City Police file and the Jefferson County Sheriff's files. But it's amazing that the bulk of the man hours at the local level was aimed at the theory that the blacks blew their own church up in order to, quote, get sympathy. People today, when they're told that, young people especially, can't believe that somebody would seriously think that, but most of those man hours and those local investigations were spent pursuing that theory. And so they were pretty useless. We had to start from scratch. Went off on a couple of wild goose chases. But we finally got to started making some progress, and when we did, we found out that the FBI had focused in on that group from the get-go, within minutes after the bomb went off. They had information where they knew that it was the Chambliss group. And so it came obvious to us that we should try to cooperate with the FBI, and I thought I'd had a good record of cooperating with them as DA in Dothan and also then as Attorney General. I first started as the DA when I was, I think, 25 and got elected Attorney General at 28. But I had a good record with, I thought, the FBI. So I made a request and said, you've closed your file. We're not interfering with your case. Your statute's run. Will you cooperate? And I never heard from them. And I was patient. Well, after a while, Hoover, soon after that, died. And I thought maybe it'd change, and we went through several interim directors, but still never heard from them. And the only way that I finally got cooperation from the FBI, and we'd been working on it by then quite a few years, but there was a fellow named Jack Nelson, who was originally from Alabama, was a friend of mine. And he was a journalist, and for about 30 years, he was the Los Angeles Times bureau chief for Washington. And Jack was a friend of mine. I was up, when I'd go up there, I'd go out with him and I'd go over to his house. And so we were out one night, and I can't remember the date, but I know Gerald Ford was president, and a man named Levi was the attorney general. And so Jack asked me, are we still working on that bombing case? He knew that I'd opened an investigation 4 years or so before. And I said, yeah, but I think we've reached a dead end. We know who did it. But I explained to him we needed help with the FBI. And so he said, well, I might can help you shake that loose. He said, you want me to try? And I said, sure. So I later went on back to the hotel, and Jack went home. Next morning, real early, the phone rang. It was Jack. And he said, you had your coffee yet? And I said, yeah, I had 2 cups. He said, well, you still want me to try to get the FBI to work with you on that file? I said, sure, we gone if we don't. We got to have it. And so he said, well, I just want to make sure that you felt the same way after you had your coffee that you did after you had those 7 or 8 beers you had last night. And so I said, yeah. So he called me in a couple of weeks and said, I think you're going to be hearing something. Sure enough, a couple of weeks after that, I got a call from the special agent in charge of the Birmingham office, and he said, just like it was something that had been pending 2 weeks, he said, Mr. Baxley, that request to work with you, to cooperate with you on that investigation, we'd be glad to do that. And so I found out later what, if I have time, I'll tell it later, but what Jack told them to get them to say that. But their definition of cooperation and mine are 180 degrees apart. If let's say I could send somebody up to their office and they'd let them look at the files, but we couldn't copy them. And so I sent a new investigator that hadn't Bob Eddy, who had not been working on the case. I wanted a new set of eyes looking at it. He went up there and got with the FBI, and he made great progress. Of course, he had already made progress over the years we had, and Eddie knew what we had done. And what I didn't realize was that their definition of cooperation was different, like I said, but if Eddie knew to ask for something, they would show it to him. But if he didn't know to ask, they didn't volunteer. They didn't tell him, and he didn't know about it. And I didn't find out till Doug's trials that there was some stuff in there that we could have convicted at least Blanton back when we convicted Cherry if we'd known about him. So the FBI cooperated to a degree. Now, I add this every time I say it, I do not mean to criticize the FBI agents on the ground. They did a fantastic job, just like Doug said. My criticism is the decision makers at the FBI high levels that made that decision.
And what do you think was motivating them? Why? Did they have jurisdiction?
No, the statute of limitation had run.
So they didn't have jurisdiction. All they could do was to cooperate with the state authorities.
Yeah. In fact, I'll get into what Jack...
Why do you think they didn't turn over their file?
Well, I get asked that all the time, and I don't have a good answer. I think it's just the nature of the beast. I think that's the way those federal agencies often do, and I think that's the way the FBI
It sure was at that time, for sure.
So you were Attorney General for a period of time, and then you Lieutenant General, and I think you as well ran for governor in Alabama.
Twice.
Twice.
You got beat twice.
Twice. But you didn't make it.
No.
What effect, if any, do you think your participation, your leadership in this case, in bringing this case back up again in 1977, had on your political ambitions and your political career, if any?
Well, I don't want to sound like a whiner, and I'm not. I got beat the first time in '78, and I think I'd have won that time. I was second out of 14 people running.
That was 1 year after the conviction of Chambliss.
Yeah, then I came back 4 years later and got elected lieutenant governor, and then got beat again in '86. But I knew about what I was getting into. I knew it wasn't going to be popular. I knew that it would probably cost me the election, but it was a small price to pay for solving that case of those little children that had been killed, and I was ready, willing, and able to pay that. Let me add one other thing. The jury that convicted Chambliss was 10 whites and 2 blacks, or 9 whites and 3 blacks. I thought it was 10 and 2, but I read an old story that said 9 and 3. But whatever it was, I thought that that was a good sign that the vast majority of the jury that convicted Chambliss back then was white.
Excellent. Thank you. Senator Jones, I want to ask you the same question. You came back to finish the case, as the Attorney General has said, in 2001, working with local prosecutors in Birmingham in conjunction with, I guess that was before the Emmett Till bill, certainly.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But certainly it was, you were a U.S. attorney and you worked together with state and local prosecutors to bring the case back before a jury. Can you say a little bit about what effect, if any, that might have had on your political career?
Look, it's probably just the opposite. And I know Bill doesn't like to whine about him losing the governor's race, but I damn sure will whine a lot about him losing that governor's race, because Alabama would have changed dramatically if Bill Baxley had been elected governor of Alabama in 1978. I can assure you that. But for me, it was just the opposite. I mean, clearly it was a long time coming. You had seen the case in, you mentioned Jackson, Mississippi, and so there was an eagerness to try to prosecute these cases. And we took up the mantle and we did it. We were successful. We didn't know whether we would be successful or not when we started, but we were. And so I think people breathed a sigh of relief. They celebrated. They didn't like to use the word closure because you never want to close any of that, but it dang sure was some healing that we had in Birmingham. And so it also gave me, I think, a platform to talk not just to the African American community, but to all people of Alabama that, look, we've moved beyond. We're trying to rectify the wrongs of the past, and we've got a lot to celebrate in this state. And let's talk about it. So I didn't run away from it at all. And in fact, Louise and I were real grateful that, in fact, in places in rural Alabama, white Alabama, where you really wouldn't always expect it, I always got to ask a question. We were just recently in her home county of Coleman, which is a very rural county in Alabama, and we had a town hall, and there was an older white gentleman who stood up and said, "Senator, I want to say something to you that I've been waiting to say for a long time." And I got, okay, here's coming. And at least
Coleman is 99.5% white.
That's right.
Coleman County.
And he said, "I just want to thank you for what you did for those 4 little girls." And that's kind of what we see and we hear. So I think it really helped me. It certainly helped galvanize African American voters to a point that they had not been galvanized, even as much as they were in Barack Obama's race in 2008. We were able to do an even better job. And it was, I think, in part of that. And I don't think there was anybody that voted against me for that reason. They voted against me for a lot of reasons, but that wasn't one of them.
Thank you. So, of course, after the Birmingham case in '77, as we say, Medgar Evers, the case against Brian de la Beckwith was tried in 1994, and then subsequently the case involving the Klan members who killed the 3 young men, civil rights workers in Mississippi, was also tried. So there have been in total about 25 of these cases involving anti-civil rights violence, obviously some more extreme, more well-known, like the Birmingham case, but there have been a number of cases. Has that period closed now? I want to ask either one of you. Do you think we're at the end of the moment when we can go back and identify perpetrators and bring them to the bar of justice and find whatever measure of closure there is in a guilty verdict?
Go ahead, Bill.
I don't think it ever ought to be closed. I don't think the Holocaust crimes and the Nazi crimes ought to ever be closed. Even now, when you see an old men coming in there being tried, those are like these civil rights assassinations and lynchings. Those are things that are so terrible. You should never stop trying to find out how they happened and who did them and why, if you can answer it. And so that ought to, as long as there's something out there to uncover about them, I think it ought to be brought out, and if they're still alive, prosecute them and put them in jail.
Yeah, I agree with everything Bill said. Unfortunately, there's so many of the potential defendants who are dead now that the window of, I think, criminal cases is, if it's not closed, it's closing rapidly every day. I mean, we lost potential witnesses, during our cases. I mean, and so I think that window for bringing those cases forward from that era is closing. But yet there are still those kind of cases happening today that we can't forget about. There was Charleston, there's Charlottesville, there's Pittsburgh. There are these cases, and that's why I think even talking about these cases and the work, Margaret, that you've done is just extremely important, because keeping these cases in the forefront, I think, reminds people of where we've been and the mistakes that we've made. And now it's not just about black and white. It's immigrants. It's religion. It's all manner of things that we have to continue to do. And as you know, and you helped us with this, we're trying. We did a lot last year to try to keep these cases alive.
Yes.
We were able to pass one of the first real standalone bill that I was able to get passed into law was the Civil Rights Cold Case Collection Act. And Ted Cruz, of all people, was the co-lead with me on this. And this is creating a commission that the president's about to start appointing. And it's going to collect these records that have been in the bowels of the government for so long and make them public. Very similar. It's patterned after the Kennedy assassination paper commission, to release those to the public. And it's going to be a way to get people talking about these and keep these not only in the public's mind, but let families and communities understand. And that's important, not just to the victims' families. It's important to the families of those perpetrators, because if we've seen over the years these families who are embarrassed and they are realizing what happened with their grandfather or even their grandmother in some cases, they like to reach out to victims and say they're sorry. And there's an element of reconciliation that goes on with this that is just really remarkable. And we've seen it time and time again. So I think keeping these cases discussing is going to be very, very important going forward.
Attorney General.
If I could just add one thing there, it goes back to that question you asked me about difficulties, but it also ties in with this one. And in one way, mine was certainly more difficult than Doug's because of the climate at the times. But in another way, and Doug's was much more difficult than mine because a lot of witnesses were still alive for us and still there. Like he mentioned, Ms. Glenn, who was one of my best two witnesses. Both of my best two witnesses were dead for Doug's.
Right.
And if Doug wasn't such a great courtroom lawyer, he'd have had a lot of trouble with just putting the case together, because by then it had been almost 40 years since the bombing. So both of them were difficult for very different reasons.
I get you. So let's open it up now to our audience. And are there questions?
By the way, we can't see any of you.
No, we can't. But you all look lovely. So if there are questions, please
I have a question.
make your way to the mic.
Okay, we got one over here.
Okay, tell us your name and then your question. That would be wonderful.
This is for Senator Jones.
Can you
Since
give
you've
us
been
your
in this,
name, sir?
Jay Gleason.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah. So, Senator Jones, you've supported legislation in the Senate to criminalize the BDS movement, the Boycott, Divest, and Sanctions movement against Israel for its occupation and apartheid system. You've also supported expanded military aid to Israel.
Yep.
I'm wondering then why you're very much concerned about Americans being deprived of their civil and human rights, but you're not equally concerned of Palestinians being deprived of their human, civil, and political rights, in America's support in making that possible.
Well, we just disagree on that political point. I think that our support for Israel is one of the strongest things that we can do. They are a strategic partner. And I don't think people fully appreciate how strategic they are, especially in a Middle East situation right now. I don't agree with everything that the Israeli government does with regard to the Palestinians, but I do agree that we need to continue to support the Israeli people and the Israeli state as much as we can, because I'm telling you, it is a vital strategic military interest to the United States, especially in a time when we got a president who is pulling out of northern Syria and allowing the Turks to go in and abandon friends and Kurds. I am not going to abandon our friends in Israel like the President of the United States did with our friends in the Kurds.
Yeah, but you would sacrifice Palestinian civil rights for that?
Sir.
That doesn't mean anything to you?
Excuse me, sir. No, thank you for your question, and I thank the senator for his answer. Next question.
Yeah, my name is Bob. I'm from Roslindale, just south of Boston. First off, let me take my hat off to all of you guys. I am deeply honored to be in your presence. And I cannot see a world where we're going to have hate and monstrous crimes that are not prosecuted and the guilty people brought in. If I would have known about that bridge that you showed, right, where they were all meeting under there, that bridge wouldn't be there anymore. I'm old Army, and there's certain red lines you don't cross. And if you hurt a kid, I will take you down. Right. You know, so thank you so much for everything you've done and that you continue to do, and educating us here on how we can be better people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, and focus on your questions, folks, if you can.
Hi,
Here
I'm
or
Noah
there?
Harris. I am a sophomore at Harvard. I'd like to thank both of you, all three of you, for being here. Senator, I had the honor of working on Mike Espy's senatorial campaign last year. He was the former Secretary of Agriculture under Bill Clinton, and we did extensive research on trying to recreate the coalition that you guys put together and are trying to redo now in a state where we have the highest percentage of African Americans per population, Mississippi. I was wondering if you guys had any advice for us in trying to reach out to voters and to get voters excited about races where we're trying to make change and improve the state.
Well, you know, look, I think if anything we've seen in the last 2.5 years is elections have consequences. And we need to make sure people know that. And, you know, when it comes to the African American population in Mississippi and Alabama, we still have voter suppression issues. We still have voter rights issues. It's not the same as it was in the 1960s when the Kennedy Justice Department was all over the map down there. But we've still got those issues. They're important. But they go beyond that now. It goes into health care. I mean, you read the book about Bobby Kennedy and his tour through Mississippi. You ought to read that. They call it The Delta Epiphany. It's an amazing book about Bobby Kennedy's journey through Mississippi and the poverty and the hunger that he saw, and he came back and it changed his life, really. And that we still have issues of health care that we've got to do, expansion of Medicaid, those kind of things to get people healthy. Those folks have to be convinced that their vote matters. And it's not always that their vote is for a winning candidate. But if they can get out in enough numbers, then people start taking notice, and they've got to talk to them, because sooner or later their candidate's going to start winning. We did that. We focused on that a lot in my race in 2017, and we got away from the issues in the South that have divided us for so long. We focused on those kitchen table issues, and it resonates, and it got people to the polls. And I think I was proud of Mike in Mississippi. Mike Espy got the closest of any Democrat running for the Senate in about 20 years. And I considered that a huge victory in Mississippi.
Thank you.
I will say they recently elected a African-American mayor in Mobile, Alabama.
Montgomery.
Montgomery.
And
Montgomery is the most recent one. So you now have three major city mayors in
major city, and we had a young African-American, Talladega, Alabama. I mean, it's
so the question is, can this filter up? Is it will it hit the statewide offices?
Yes.
And
we just yesterday, now there's still some legal issues about this, but just yesterday, in a movement that Louise and I really worked hard to do, the Alabama Democratic Party just elected its first African-American chair and gay vice chair.
Okay.
So things are on the move.
Okay. Can we have your question?
Okay. Senator Jones, my name is Vanita Singh, and I have just moved here from Huntsville, Alabama, after living there for 34 years.
Don't change your votes yet, okay?
No.
You got to do it again.
And I have to tell you that I worked in your campaign in 2017.
Thank you.
And we all celebrated when you won. My question is, besides the civil rights cold case that you are responsible for, you also worked on the involuntary land loss that has been happening to black Americans in Alabama and all over the South. And I want to know what has happened to that, what was it called?
Heirs property.
Heirs property. I would like for you to answer what has been done about that.
Well, thanks for asking. I don't know if you guys are familiar with heirs property, but after the Civil War, African American slaves were given property. And over the years, that property was passed down from generation to generation. A lot of it was lost because of not clear title. They could not get clear title. And at some point, they couldn't get USDA farm numbers, which kept them away from subsidies and crop insurance and those kind of things that the federal government has been giving to white landowners for a long time. A lot of times those property owners, when it got to be a problem within the family, someone would petition to sell it, and so everybody lost the property. Between 1910, this is a true story, between 1910 and 1997, 90% of all property owned by African Americans in this country was lost. 90%. And it was due to heirs property issues. So last year, Tim Scott from South Carolina and I put a bill in. We got it in the Farm Bill to correct that, to give them with some proper certain documentation the ability to get farm subsidies and to get a farm number. That was one of the biggest deals that we did. We've got another program that will create a fund within the Department of Agriculture to allow for loans to these farmers that have been deprived. And just last week, it's interesting you ask, because just last week, as part of our appropriations process, I had an amendment to fund that fund to the tune of about $5 million, which is a start. It's not all that we need. But that passed the Senate to fund that program with a 90-to-1 vote. So we've done a lot on that issue. I've been really proud of it. So thank you. Thank you for asking. There was a big article, by the way. If y'all are interested in that, you ought to read the big article in The Atlantic about this whole issue that was a couple of months ago. It's really, I didn't even know about it until a year ago.
Well, thank you. And also making clear that things can get done and are getting done, notwithstanding.
They can.
Yes.
They can.
That's great.
At least they have been. I don't know about going forward.
Sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Kanwar Singh. Thank you for being here. It's really an honor to hear you all speak. I actually was in Birmingham, Alabama last year, and I got goosebumps just traveling through the city because I read through the tremendous impact that city had had on civil rights in America. And thank you for prosecuting those cases and bringing those perpetrators to justice. Senator, I think you highlighted Pittsburgh, Charlottesville, Charleston. We also know there was an attack against the Sikh community in Oak Creek, Wisconsin.
Yep.
Hopefully after next year's election, we will have a change in politics in this country. And so I am curious, based on your background and experiences, this is for all three of you, how do we begin the process of racial reconciliation in America? How do we bring different people together and showcase the greatness of this country? Thank you.
Cut off Twitter.
Well, I would add that, Doug earlier mentioned Dylan, what's the fellow's name from Charleston?
Dylan Roof.
Dylan Roof, right? Dylan Roof is the Chambliss of 2017, 2016, whenever Charleston happened. So these events continue to percolate up. We're not. 1963 is really not that long ago when you think about the filth and dirt and hate that is circulating, not just on Twitter, but in our daily discourse. But it's also true that there is an enormous interest and appetite for learning about the history of race in this country, as evidenced by the 1619 report of New York Times Magazine, as evidenced by new information about African American land loss in the 20th century, concerns and interest in the legacy of slavery. So we're living in this kind of duality in which there's sort of more hate directed at more people of color across the country, but at the same time, more education taking place. I'm in a university, and I hear what resonates with students and what students want to know about, what they want to learn about, what they feel was lacking from their secondary school education. And that gives me enormous hope that this is, although it's an enormously precarious moment that is deeply frightening to all of us, it is also a moment in which there is an opening.
Yep. Bill, you want to answer that too? You want to chime in? Or you got anything to add? Because
I don't think I can add anything to that.
Margaret,
she's the expert on that,
right.
and not just this room, maybe this country.
Right. But, you know, I do think, and I was being facetious about Twitter, kind of, I do think social media is a huge problem because there's not only misinformation, people have gone into their silos. And, you know, back when I was U.S. Attorney, we were seeing the rise of the internet and we saw the rise of hate crimes then, because people would get into their silos and they would only read and it would feed their fears. And there are so many dog whistle politics. And that's what I don't think people fully appreciate and understand with the hateful rhetoric we see from politicians these days. I'm not going to name any names, but we see that. And I don't think people fully realize George Wallace and Bull Connor. I do not believe that George Wallace and Bull Connor wanted these 4 girls to be killed. I do not believe that they were telling people and ordering deaths and murders. But with their dog whistle politics and their hate, they were giving people the green light because they were telling them, it's okay. Don't worry about it. We see that. We are still seeing it, and we've got to have politicians and public servants standing up, speaking out, and saying, no, you cannot say that. You cannot say that there are good people on both sides, because there's not good people on both sides.
Thank you.
Bill, did you want to add anything?
I was just going to comment on that last point about our moderator, that's why I said she's the expert in the country. She was asked by President Mandela to come to South Africa and be the advisor to help them create their Commission on Reconciliation, which she did and served well doing that. And also, I'll add, she was born in Birmingham.
Born in Birmingham, but claimed Boston. The 2 best cities in the world.
Yes, my name is Bill Mullen, and first of all, I'd like to say if there was ever to be a sequel to Profiles Encouraged by President Kennedy, you 2 people would be in it. My question is, would you describe, if you can, what those 4 men were like that did this? I think one of the things is a psychological profile of how men like this could kill 4, maybe could have killed 5 girls that age. And I see this as a sick crime, but what were these people like from what you saw?
Bill, you had the first run-in with them.
Chambliss was responsible for at least 40 bombings in Birmingham from the 1940s through 63. And he died in prison. We convicted him. He got life and died. And he died totally unrepentant, totally. Cherry was none of them were repentant, none of them. Cherry was a blowhard and a bully. We were questioning him, and we had him in a police station in Texas, trying to remember the town. It's between Dallas and Fort Worth. And so the other policeman got up to go get a cup of coffee or a Coke or something, and my investigator went, and it left me and Cherry in there. And he said, I'm fixing to come around that table and whip your... I said, Cherry, I wish you'd come on. You're bigger than I am. But I said, one of these people is going to come back in here, and then we're going to really have a good case on you. I can have a warrant and take you back with us. And so he didn't come around, but he was a blowhard and a threat. Blanton is in prison now, and he is totally unrepentant. But I think a story that I can tell will best illustrate what kind of people these are, to answer your question. And this was told me by Art Haynes Jr., who he and his dad, Art Haynes Sr., were the lawyers for Chambliss. And they were honorable, good lawyers, tough fighters, but good people. And Art Jr. told me that after the jury came back and convicted Chambliss, his daddy told him he had to go out and tell Miss Chambliss that Robert had been convicted. So he went out there, and it was early in the afternoon, and he said the curtains were down, the blinds were down, and no lights anywhere in the house. He knocked on the door, and this voice said, "Come in, it's open." Said he went in, it was dark in there, every bit of light shut out in the middle of the day, and she was lying in a robe on a couch with a wet rag on her forehead. And so he said, "Miss Chambliss," said, "I'm sorry, I have to come tell you, Dad told me to come tell you, the jury has just come back and found Robert guilty." And she said, "What does that mean?" I said, "Well, he found him guilty of murder." And she said, "What does that mean?" I said, "Well, it means he'll get life. That'll be the sentence." Said, we're going to appeal the case, and we're going to fight it. And she said, "Well, when will he be coming home?" He said, "That's what I'm here to tell you. You need to get up some supplies and toiletries and take down there to him in the jail, because he's not going to come home. You can't make bond when you've been convicted of murder. And we'll appeal it, but that'll take 2 or 3 years. And it just, honestly, it looks like it's a pretty clean record. It's going to be hard to get it changed, reversed." Said, "Well, when's he going to come home?" He said, "That's what I'm here trying to tell you. At his age, Miss Chambliss, it doesn't look like he'll ever come home." She said, "You mean he won't ever come in this house again?" He said, "I'm afraid that's what the odds are." And he said she jumped up and threw that rag across the room and started dancing around and letting the windows up and opening the blinds and said, "Hallelujah, thank you, Jesus, praise the Lord, hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah." These Klansmen were bullies. And the other best witness other than Miss Glenn to us was Chambliss's niece, or his wife's niece. And they were bullies and mistreated the women, and nearly every one of them. And they're, Doug can tell you some good stories about some of Cherry's wives.
Yeah, they have no soul. I mean, they just...
They're terrible people.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I want to just add that Doug tells the story in the book about a young white lawyer in Alabama, in Birmingham, by the name of Charles Murray, who after Birmingham in... Charles Morgan. In 1963, right after the murder, there is a gathering of white folk talking about what had happened, and they're very much, well, who could have done this? And Morton says, "We did this.
Right.
We did this. All of us, those of us who stood by the side, all of us who were, bystanders and who said nothing but could have, we did this." So it's important to focus on what these people were like, the ones we put in jail, but it's also important to focus on the ocean in which they're swimming.
Right, and none of these guys, at least the ones that we talked to, none of these guys ever changed their stripes. Never changed their stripes. Totally unrepentant. I met with Blanton 3 different times. Once before he was indicted, once after he was convicted, 4 times. Once before he was indicted, once after he was there to try to get him to help with Cherry. And I met with him twice while he's in prison, and I get the same thing all the time. It was always somebody else.
Was there another question?
This over here.
Hi. First, I want to thank you, and I want to thank the JFK Library for bringing this wonderful program to us, and thanks to everyone on the platform. My name is Dr. Barbara Paremba, and I'm here to personally thank you on behalf of the 124,000 women who served in the United States Cadet Nurse Corps in World War II and have yet to be recognized as honorary veterans for their service to our country. And Senator Doug Jones is an original co-sponsor of this. I am behind the organization that's been working for this. And this is really the culmination of 25 years of bills sitting in committees and going nowhere. So as you know, can we give him a shout out for being our co-sponsor here? So I'll just fill you in case you might have forgotten
I
any
know
of this.
you have a question.
There is a question coming to this.
Terrific.
So it's very important because you are acknowledging this group of women, and it's very important that we're discussing civil rights today. But this group, and has anyone even heard of this group before? There's a question. And that's a problem right there. This was the first integrated service. That means that they had to accept African Americans, Native Americans, and also the interned Japanese young women. And we are right now, because we're in the same situation that you were in with your people dying who are testifying, but we have very few of these nurses still left alive that want to be recognized as their final dying wish. We maybe have 2,000 or 3,000 that could be alive in various states of health. But I would like you to know that I do have 2 surviving black cadet nurses. They're in Maryland. I have a lot more than that, but I'm excited that I have found them. So my question is, right now, the United States Cadet Nurse Corps Service Recognition Act was passed in the House as an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act, and it was not passed in the Senate. My understanding is it was considered that there was some direct spending cost with it, so it was put in a package that's going to have problem because I believe you're doing a skinny bill.
Well, Senator Inhofe has proposed one. I don't know whether it'll get anywhere. We're still trying to get the whole package done. And if you will see me or my wife afterwards, I might can find out where that stands, because if we've got to pay for on problems with a couple of things, that is one of them. I've got to trying to eliminate the military widows tax, which is horrible as well, and there's a pay-for issue there that we're trying to get in. But if you'll try to hang around for a little bit,
I absolutely
I'll
will,
try to
and
get
I
you an
really
update.
appreciate it, and I really wanted people to know that he is such a courageous man because he is an island of support. We have no support at all in the South. He is the only one. No Louisiana, no Tennessee, no Kentucky, no North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, you name them all. They are silent, and he is a very courageous, and we're very lucky to have you. Thank you so very much.
What she's saying, Bill, is that I'm the only one in the Democratic caucus that talks without an accent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hello, Senator Jones. My name is Athena Zeider-Hale. I work next door at the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate. We live in deeply polarizing times. We often joke next door that we pass more bills with the school children in our Senate chamber than you do in yours. You talked about some of your work with Senator Ted Cruz in creating the Civil Rights Commission. I also think of former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, who grew up in Birmingham and actually went to school with, I believe, 2 of the girls who in the bombing, and she knew all 4 of them. Right. So what can we do to reach across that aisle in the Senate to find common ground and gain bipartisan support in these deeply polarizing times?
Well, it's a great question, but I would invite you to go look on the website at all of the bills that have been introduced in this Congress, in the Senate. And what you're going to find is that so many, overwhelmingly the number of bills that have been introduced are bipartisan bills. There's a Republican lead and a Democratic lead. Now, there's some that are strictly Republican. There's some that are strictly Democrat. But overwhelmingly, I think 80% of the ones that I am co-sponsoring are bipartisan. And we also have what's a process that we often, with some of these bills, the lead sponsors will do what they call a Noah's Ark, and they will get 1 Democrat, 1 Republican. And you got to get on a waiting list if you want to co-sponsor to have somebody in the other party. So there's a lot of things that are going on that you don't see in the Senate anyway. You see dueling press conferences and political speeches. But there's a lot of work at the staff level and senator to senator that's going on. The problem is not the bipartisanship with the legislation and trying to work on it. The problem is getting it to the Senate floor. And that's a Mitch McConnell problem, not a U.S. Senate problem. I'm telling the leader of the Senate can put bills on the floor or not put them on the floor. And, you know, he likes to call himself the Grim Reaper. And we've got I think 200 bills that the House of Representatives have already passed, including putting more strength and teeth into the Voting Rights Act that's just sitting there. Election security that the House of Representatives have passed is just sitting there. And that should be a bipartisan issue, by the way. So our problem really is not being able to get these to the Senate floor. There's a lot of work that's going on, and if you look at those bills, you'll see it on health care, you'll see it in banking, you see it on armed services. Our NDAA that she was just talking about was a bipartisan bill, passed our committee like 28 or 29 to 1. So it's really getting them out there. I'll give you an example. On that NDAA, we marked up that bill. When you say a markup, that's when a committee really argues about the bill, votes on amendments, and tries to vote it out of committee. When we did that NDAA, the National Defense Authorization, we closed the doors and we didn't let media or lobbyists come in there. And we considered 100 or so amendments. And overwhelmingly, I bet I could count on one hand the number of amendments that we voted on in that committee that were along party lines. And those were just policy issues. It was overwhelmingly bipartisan. People don't see that, and it's really frustrating when you're in a position like me that does try to reach across the aisle. Sometimes, you know, I have to reach within my own party to yank them into the right way, but that's a different story. But you don't see that a lot. You really don't see as much as that goes on, and that's unfortunate. But we need to get it to the Senate floor. And if we can get legislation to the Senate floor and get back to the regular order like Ted Kennedy used to do. I worked on the Judiciary Committee when Ted Kennedy was the chair and Strom Thurmond was the ranking member. And guess what? They got things done. And it's because we had regular order and it got to the floor of the Senate at the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Tim.
We have time for two more
All right,
questions.
you gotta go
So,
this
yes.
side.
My name is Tim Green. I live in one of the western suburbs of Boston. My wife grew up in South Carolina, right near Strom Thurmond, and this was in the era of The Help, the book The Help, where white people would entrust their children to black nannies but not allow them to use the bathroom. Right. My wife, I think, feels a tremendous amount of guilt for living through that time and not standing up to it. And she has become very active in an organization in Boston called White People Confronting Racism, which I encourage people to get very involved in. My question to you, and I'm going to go home and write a check to you, answer your email and write a check this afternoon, but my question to you is, could you speak about reparations at all?
Yeah, there's a couple of things pending. I think that's going to be an issue in the 2020 race. I think the most interesting thing that's done right now is that it's a complicated issue that nobody really can fully figure out the best way to address. And I know Cory Booker has got a bill in the Senate, and I think there's a companion in the House that will actually get a bipartisan and nonpartisan commission to look at this and see the best way to do that. I mean, clearly, and I support that. I think it's something that's got to look at. And I would tell you guys, everybody ought to come to Alabama. I mean, I'm telling you, you ought to come down to Alabama and go through the Civil Rights Trail and go to Selma and go to Montgomery, go to Birmingham and visit the church and the park. Go to the lynching memorial, and I think that there is a growing, and that's what Margaret was referring to, I think, earlier about how to address the issues of slavery that we've never really fully reconciled with.
And let me just say also on the reparations question, of course, John Conyers, who initially introduced H.R. 40, which is the reparations study bill, reparations for slavery study bill, introduced it in 1978 or 1979, right. Recently passed away. We regret his loss, but he introduced it, and that's the bill that Cory Booker on the Senate side and Representative Jackson on the House side reintroduced about 6 months ago. When it was first introduced in 1977, it had very, very little support on the House or Senate side. Now everyone is lining up, and this is just a bill to study what Senator Jones says is a complicated question. But it is a question that obviously is percolating around the world, not just in the United States, but really around the world, of the question of how do we, what accounting should we be making for slavery today?
And let me tell you something else that's going to give that a little momentum, I think, is I don't know if the last slave ship to come to America was called the Clotilda, and it landed in Mobile, Alabama on the Mobile River. And the descendants got off, and that ship was burned. They recently found that ship in the Mobile River, and are working now to preserve it, to try to get it. And we're going to use that also as another marker in Alabama about civil rights and civil rights history. And I think that that's also going to help people. It's just going to keep in people's mind the issue of slavery and what we can do to fully come to grips.
Thank you.
Sir?
Yes, thank you. Senator Jones, and I just want to say thank you on behalf of Pakistani Americans. My name is Ali Khan. I've been living in this beautiful country for 30 years, so I want to say that how proud I am to see a bipartisan mindset in Congress today. One of the deep concerns I have is that the country, as many people prior to me have mentioned, that it's continually divided, and I love to see more bipartisan efforts like yourself, and someone who's been really a champion for human justice. One of the issues that I wanted to bring up today is something for the last 90 days has been happening, is the issue of Kashmir.
Yeah.
And I feel like because there's so much war, unfortunately, in the world today, and as a lifelong human rights advocate myself, I feel like, you know, once it's out of the media, it's out of sight, out of mind, right, unfortunately. So I'd like to say, what can you do as a bipartisan effort? I've been going to D.C. as well and advocating with Indians, Chinese Americans, Indian Americans, Pakistani Americans, and trying to bring people together so we can focus on the human rights aspect at a minimal, right, of a disputed land for the last 70 years. So I'd like to ask you, what can you do to make sure, as a champion of human rights yourself and justice, right, what can you do to advocate for the rights of Kashmiri 8 million families who are under lockdown for the last 90 days?
Yeah, no, it's a real problem. I'm going to be very candid with you about it. I'm not sure at this point. That issue has been percolating out there. It is not one that we have looked at on the as far as the Armed Services Committee yet. Foreign Relations is probably looking more at that. But if you will contact my staff and talk to folks, I am happy to take a deeper dive into that, because it's just literally just recently I've known about it, but not in a deep enough dive to really answer your question at this point. But I'm happy to try to do more, because I know enough about it to know that it's a real serious problem out there.
Absolutely. I appreciate your honesty. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. May I thank the audience for your questions, for your attendance, and for your support for all of these issues, and thank, of course, the Kennedy Institute and Library for bringing these absolutely amazing Americans to this platform and to us here in Boston. We do want to close it off at this point so that everyone will have, who wishes, and I hope that will be many of you, will have an opportunity to buy Doug's absolutely marvelous book. And I want to also end by thanking the Attorney General Bill Baxley, Senator Doug Jones. Thank you so much for joining our community.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.